Hello and welcome to the Gardner Innovation Search Partners podcast. On today's episode, we're excited to have Dan Johnson, Professor and Vice Chancellor of Research, Innovation, and Enterprise at Macquarie University. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Quinton. Nice to be with you.
It's great to have you here. Excited to have you on. So we'll just dive right in. So first thing I'll ask is, can you tell us a little bit about your role as Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation, and Enterprise at Macquarie, and what are the main responsibilities and objectives of your team?
Yeah, so my role at Macquarie University has four main components. The first is to make the university a really easy, natural, preferred organisation for partners to work with right across research and education. The second is to work on large scale and depth building research initiatives, the kind that run for many years into the decades, hundreds or tens of millions of dollars, and really change the game for the research program at our institution. The third is around innovation and technology transfer and commercialization. So supporting licensing activities, our founders to create startups, and a culture of entrepreneurship that surrounds that, and the incubation and ongoing support of those companies. And fourthly, to work with our adjacent innovation district, which is called Macquarie Park Innovation District. It's a 6.8 square kilometre, about 2.6 square miles, I think, innovation precincts, 13 billion Australian dollars, about 8 billion US dollar turnover, 400 companies, and 63,000 employees. And a lot of them interact with the university in some way. So I facilitate the university's interaction with that. So the way we assess our performance is through the overall strategic and financial health of the university. And that includes things like student attraction and retention and employment after they graduate, but also a range of metrics to do with our research and our output. So are we generating environmental, social, financial returns for the community, for our investors, and for the university? We think about financial returns, but we also think about a broader suite of metrics to assess impact overall.
That is a lot that you're overseeing there. So, and a lot going on there, it sounds like. So that's really exciting. And also, thank you for giving to our audience in square miles as well, too. So just to jump into a little bit about the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem there. So how does Macquarie support innovation and entrepreneurship, both within the university and in the broader ecosystem there?
Well, culture and policy are extremely important to us. So we start not just with the university itself. Because we're part of a broader innovation district, we don't just support entrepreneurship for students and staff of the university. If you're a member of the local community working in your garage on a great idea, we want to work with you. But we also want to work with our students. We also want to work with our staff. And so we see our role as being much bigger than just looking after ideas that come from the university. We see no one has a monopoly on wisdom or ideas, so we want to just take the best ideas from wherever we can and help create ventures that then will be the big employers, the big taxpayers, the big drivers of revenue and domestic product in the future from wherever they come. So that's our broader ecosystem. And then closer to home, of course, is where we spend most of our effort in terms of our resources, both in kind and financial. So the culture and policy piece is very important for us. We're on a real mission to build a culture of entrepreneurship. We try and have policy settings that make our university very founder-friendly. So if a researcher wants to try their hand at being a researcher entrepreneur, we try and have ways to hold their position for them while they explore that idea to see if it's going to be viable or not, but there's a safety net if it doesn't. We try and bring in people into the university that think differently. They don't have, say, classical academic track records. We want that too, and we assess that as well, but we look at the whole individual. So people who have, say, a great H-index or lots of papers or lots of student completions, great, we want that kind of person. We also want people who can do other things too, patent applications, startup companies, generating impact and so on. So we look for rounded individuals as well as specialists across those domains and offer promotion pathways and workload models and so on that suit them. So you can come from an industry setting into our university environment and get promoted up to very senior levels by working with partners. So we try and really create that culture where that's supported actively, publicly. And when it comes to founders, we try and work back from what is the medium long-term success of those companies. So when they hit Series C and they're scaling, got loads of employees, what does the cap table look like? What does the organizational structure look like then? Okay, and what, therefore, working backwards, retrofitting it, what does it need to look like when the company's being created? And so the kind of terms that we offer as a university to founders is setting them up for that kind of success down the line. So there's a few thoughts, and I think we've really benefited from the folks in the US, particularly also in the UK and the EU, learning about what they've done well and adopting aspects of their model and refining our model. And we're very grateful for the support of Gardner and others in assisting us on that journey. My head of tech transfer was sourced through Gardner, so very grateful for that.
That's great. Yeah. And, talking about learning from the US, I mean, I think a lot of people are even in the US are interested in learning from you and others as well. And just kind of talking about learning from the US, I know you mentioned a tool in our prep call as well, this USIT guide as well. Said that was a valuable tool for university founder collaborations. And when we were talking about it, we were talking about how there could be some similarities to some of the things we use here in the US. But can you elaborate on what that USIT guide is and how it helps streamline transactions and establish best practices?
Yeah, so USIT, I think, stands for the University Spin-out Investment Term Guide. And so it's a publicly available document that was produced by a group in the United Kingdom, drawing on expertise and case studies from, I think, the European Union, US, and the UK. And it was about 300 startup transactions over a 5-year period, which a small group of university tech transfer people and service providers and capital providers got together and said, all right, if we stand back, what is a normal kind of landing zone for transactions that are coming from startups out of universities? And they did this effort by saying to generate a kind of a chessboard where there's pieces that you can move around, but there's only so many variables. And it means that when a team of founders is working with their university to think about a startup or capital providers are coming in, you start the discussions from a much higher baseline, because often a founding group will come in and they'll know very little, or a university might have had a turnover in their staff. They want to be active in entrepreneurship. They don't really know where to begin. And prior to this time, my university was working with my counterparts at other institutions and my team's counterparts. How are they doing it? What does their term sheet look like? What are the limits they've hit? Maybe we could tweak our model there and there. It was all kind of through networks and done kind of offline for us. So what USIT does is a public document, which then can become essential background reading for any capital research founder, research entrepreneur founder and university kind of discussion. Before you come into the room, everyone's across what you have to do, but what's common. Every transaction, every relationship is bespoke. You need to look through the nuances. You need to have compromise. You need to really tailor things for those circumstances. But by just having an understanding that an equity range for a university spin out for the university tends to be in between here and here. And if it's dilutable, it's higher. If it's not dilutable, it's lower. If you want a royalty rate, well, it's probably going to be lower. If it's software, it's going to look more like this. This is what board seats look like here, how we manage indemnity and liability and so on. You can get to a term sheet, we found, faster with this publicly available document backed by that kind of large reference database.
And those types of things are really useful, especially for someone. I know when I started in tech transfer, I started on the marketing side of things, but even getting to understand how do we come to term? How do you even where do you even begin with developing a term sheet? Those types of things are really useful. And I can imagine for people that are new, whether they're coming from industry and going into this space or coming in new, those types of resources are really useful. Would love to link to that material in our show notes as well for our audience to be able to take a look at if that is something that is publicly available for them to look at as well.
And there was a more recent edition of it actually released for software, which has its own unique requirements. It's less about patents, more about speed to market, and it's so you can tailor your investment arrangements, your equity split, particularly things like that, and royalty rates can be adjusted to suit that particular type of subset of licensing and startups.
Yeah, actually, on that note, typically, because that's a really good point. That whether it's something, it could be like a therapeutic, could be software, could be just a wide variety of things. So right now there are two forms of that guide. Is that what you're saying? For different things?
Yeah, there's the use it guide itself, which I think was 2022, and then there's the software one, which might have been this year or last. Just I guess a revised version of the master, which would still be relevant for most instances, particularly for deep tech. Whereas some of the software ones, a bit more nuanced and subtle. So both I think would be useful to link to the podcast. I found them both useful.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And so one of the other things that we touched on before is how Macquarie, as well as other universities or institutions in Australia, have a unique model for partnering with venture funds. I think it's really interesting. Can you explain a little bit about how this model works and the benefits it brings to university and its research initiatives?
Yeah, the model you're referring to is called UniSeed. So in Australia, some years ago, this venture was created before I became involved in it. And it's been running for a number of funds now. The idea is to have a venture fund which is owned and operated by its members, which are the larger and some now mid-sized universities in Australia and the National Research Organisation. Ordinarily, what would happen in the researcher capital raising ecosystem is that the founders of the university will come up with an idea they think is interesting, and then they'll pitch it to a VC or lots of different VCs to find the one that wishes to invest, or it's a consortium. And those VCs will often look at it and say yes or no, based on what they see presented to them, the quality of the team, and whatever metric they're looking for. What we do with UniSeed is have a venture building approach. So UniSeed, it has the members invest into the fund. A proportion of that is put aside to build a team within UniSeed. And then UniSeed will work with those universities on their pipeline of activities, pipeline of deals. And it will help look at them and say, we're not just going to look and say yes or no to invest UniSeed's own funds into it. We're going to help build the propositions that we believe in into the form where they are ready for investment from UniSeed, but then also for others. So that's why we call it a venture building approach. Now, that skill is a really useful skill set, like in terms of individuals able to spot ideas and build them up into investment-ready opportunities. And it's not one that every institution readily has. And certainly for many founding teams, it's a very useful thing as well. So UniSeed's members are universities. It draws on a network of people working in the tech transfer ecosystem of those institutions to advise on its committees and indeed on its board. And so once it gets a deal through those various stages of due diligence and then those checks and balances, it will make an investment. Not only will it make an investment, it will lead that investment, which is also critical, because with a leader that then it goes on, acts on your behalf, you as the founding team, your behalf, to syndicate and find the other forms of capital. You have to pitch them and so on as well. But because they take that position of confidence, they lead from the front. Others can say, okay, well, we will come in. We don't want to lead ourselves, but we'll come in and syndicate under your leadership because you know what you're talking about. So for us as Macquarie Uni, we're a middle-sized Australian university. We're not as big as a couple of the very, very big ones. And so for us, we try and be very good at the things we do. We don't try and do absolutely everything. We try and be really good at the things that we do, and that's across research and other things. And in this case, we don't produce sufficient numbers of startups every year to give us to justify our own fund, because that fund would have only the opportunities that we ourselves can generate as it's the things in which it could invest. Now that would be great. I'd love to have that. But it doesn't actually make economic sense so much for the university because of the scale of the number of startups we can put through from our own portfolio. But by joining with something like UniSeed and investing in a fund, we then get an opportunity for funds to come back with venture capital into our own startups, but also we have indirect exposure in a portfolio sense and diversification sense to all of the startups created by every other institution that's currently a member. Now, of the current membership base, it's about 60% of the Australian R&D spend and therefore, that kind of proportion, give or take, of the opportunities that arise for commercialization is captured under that umbrella. So we come in as a minor player in that story, but have exposure to the whole package. So when the university looks at why would we do this and the benefits, I guess, to us, it kind of comes in three folds. There's the venture building component, a team of people that help look for the best opportunities and build them into investment-ready opportunities, not just say yes or no. A way of having a form of capital and a leadership of that capital where we can access that capital, but then they help syndicate and build confidence in the market to raise the total capital for us. And that when we're coming to look at things like return on investment, we have a built-in diversification strategy by exposure to not just our startups, but others. And so the financial return on investment actually takes three forms. There's the form that you can generate by having a minor position in the startup when it's created. That's your own direct holding. Then there's the indirect exposure you have by your involvement in a fund, which invests in that same startup. And then thirdly, because UniSeed is owned by its members and understands how they think, when the startup with capital on board needs to do any work, like get some R&D done or something, they will usually try where they can and drive that opportunity back through the original host institution, meaning that you also then get revenue and other forms of impact in your core business of research and education, so that the ecosystem sort of feeds on itself. So for us, it's been a really interesting model. We've only been a member since sort of last year, but so far it's been a really good journey. And I know a number of other universities have been members for much, much longer than us, and they continue to invest and find value.
We talked about just that access to capital, that diversification, and then also the position that you get as the institute in this, while also driving some of that attention back to the university, and that indirect impact. Being involved in this one fund gives you access to a diversified access to a variety of startups and other companies as well. So I love that. In our previous conversation with Dr. Wilbur Lamb at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, we also spoke briefly with him about how a lot of companies are wanting to see technologies get further down the line than universities have traditionally taken them before they decide to invest in them. And I was curious if that was also something that you were seeing at Macquarie or even at other institutions in Australia, and that was also maybe part of the driver for this, because it sounds like with this UniSeed, what you're talking about, they help to get it into an investable state. That innovation into an investable position. So I'm just curious, just that companies wanting to see technologies further along before they invest in them, further than universities typically have taken them. Is that something that you've seen there as well?
Yes, in part. So one point of clarification on the UniSeed model, it doesn't invest so much, say, in taking something from a TRL 4 to TRL 5 or 6 and therefore have the technology ready for investment. It tends to do more in the governance structure, the cap table, the organizational mechanics, the business model, the legal agreements, that sort of thing, which would be the early stages of due diligence an investor might throw out if they're not right. So it gets them ready in that sense. But your broader point is absolutely valid. We talk about the value of death, trying to go from something that is low TRL to high TRL when a third party is willing to come in and invest in that. We see it depends on the sector. It depends on what the founding team looks like and so on. So we often find ways to navigate around that kind of issue. The university itself has a very modest pool of resources that we can invest into discrete items of IP to take them a little further along. That killer experiment that if you had that outcome, we do a little bit of that within the uni. And what we're also seeing around other universities in this state, also in the UK and the EU and the US, is a lot of universities, of course, creating their own funds. And that's in part to retain ownership for longer and be able to participate in the capital raises, but it's also in part to be able to get things further down the pipeline before they raise money, because you're taking some of the risk off the table for the investors. And in many cases, of course, what they can also do then is justify a better valuation when they do raise money ultimately. So there's good economics and good impact rationale for doing it. So far, our university hasn't gone down the path of creating our own fund for that. Maybe over time, I'd like to think so, but we're not there yet.
Just to wrap up, looking ahead, what do you see as the key trends and challenges in the field of research and innovation at academic institutions? And then potentially just what do you think about potential solutions to address those challenges?
Yeah, it's a really good question because it's really topical for us because this very week there's been some legislation introduced in the Australian Parliament to cap international students. And I believe Canada's gone down that path, and UK sort of talked about it a bit as well. And I see also in the US election debates, there's lots of questioning about the roles of universities from some of the candidates. And so I find myself reflecting on this question about the social license of universities. Do they enjoy, like a lot of big institutions that pre-COVID maybe enjoyed a lot of public support and currency? And I mean, sort of, you call it volunteer groups and governments and religious institutions and so on. A lot of them have seen an erosion in their social capital, and I wonder if the same is also happening with universities. And if that's true, if universities don't have perhaps quite the same social currency and capital that they once did, what's going to be the solution for that? Well, for me, the very topic of today's discussion it has a central role to play in the solution, because one of the reasons I think that like a taxpayer who then pays money to government, then government invests and does the bulk of the investing in the sort of research ecosystem that funds this sort of university model. Those folks investing the tax in upfront or sending their children to university, they really like to see very tangible forms of return, of impact coming from the investment that goes in at the front end. And in our nation, the US is obviously dominant in terms of the global R&D leagues. Australia is sort of top 10, depending on which measure you look at. But one of the things that we've not done so well as a nation here is being able to generate that impact or that commercialization, the tangible metrics for commercialization for that R&D coming out. And so it's a work in progress for a lot of institutions. We're doing a lot better than we were, say, even a decade ago, even a few years ago. But there's still work that we can do, because the research and innovation commercialization activity of a university is the mechanism through which the great ideas that are generated, and there are so many of them, are given the ability to fulfill their potential, to realize their impact. And so it's not the bit of the university that is in it of itself going to generate large sums of money for the university. Very few examples globally where a higher education institution can run large, significant proportions of its revenue off its commercialization. It does it every now and then. It's really about achieving impact. And so if the commercialization translation ecosystem can do its job well, it will create forms of impact, financial, environmental, social, that then create the halo effect for the entire enterprise. They build businesses that then employ people. That's where the students graduate and find jobs. They build the local economy, they pay tax, and then you have a virtuous circle working. So I think overall I'm very bullish about the role of higher education and research. And I think to the extent that there is a few issues that we need to look at, I really do believe that research, commercialization, innovation is right at the heart of where emphasis and effort needs to go to really own that model and allow it to scale and allow universities to realize their true impact.
It's about achieving impact. If done well, the work higher education does will have a halo effect and positively impact the communities around them. I really like that. And I think that's a great place to close as well. We have been talking to Dan Johnson, Professor and Vice Chancellor of Research, Innovation, and Enterprise at Macquarie University. Dan, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks very much for the opportunity.
And for those of you out there who are interested in learning more, check out our show notes for more information, as well as links to some useful information of things that we talked about in this episode. And be sure to visit gardnerisp.com to learn more about Gardner Innovation Search Partners.